Hey, welcome back. I'm Carissa and I am in the middle of my Master Gardener training for my local region, and it has been just a great source of information, a wealth of knowledge, and I've just really enjoyed the experience so far. So today's topic is on pollinators. The term pollinator is more of a descriptive term, right? Within that category, there are numerous different mammals and insects that we're going to be talking about. So let's start with the definition of what is a pollinator. So this is insects or animals that help plants reproduce by transferring pollen from one to another. Pollinators are critical in production of many crops, and they are essential in creating and preserving biodiversity. It is said that for every 1 in 3 bites of food that we eat, pollinators are to thank for that food. So like most of my topics that I've been doing in my Master Gardeners training, these are huge topics, usually taught by professors or authors or very knowledgeable gardeners with tons of experience, and it is hard to sort of nail down all of these topics in a quick video that I'm producing for you. I would encourage you to source out information that pertains to your local region. This is a diverse topic, tons of different pollinators, tons of different insects in every region that we live in, and I would just encourage you to explore this topic on your own. For the sake of simplicity, let's go over what pollination is. Pollination is a process. Pollination occurs when pollen from the male anther, the part of the flower plant, is transferred to the female stigma. So that is the process, and we know that flower seeds can only be created when the pollen is transferred between the flower parts of the same species. So one flower will have both of those parts, the female and male part, and joining those two pieces is when pollination occurs, and it is needed to produce a seed. The goal in these plants in pollination is reproduction. They want to produce more offspring, they want to produce seed, which will then produce more plants. When you're shopping for apple trees, you might notice a word called self-pollinating, and that occurs with some plants, but many require cross-pollination in order to reproduce. So why should we be concerned about pollinators? I think most of us know why, but here are a few reasons. In order to have food, which is essential to us humans, we need food production, and pollinators are to thank for that. Another reason would be a healthy ecosystem. Bringing in different pollinators is a sign that we have a healthy ecosystem. When we first moved to this property that we're on now, I was just in awe of all the different creatures, all the different life that I was observing. It was very obvious to me that I was coming into an ecosystem that was already thriving, right? Because we have a forest right behind us, there's lots of bugs and insects and different birds and creatures that all have a hand in the ecosystem that I'm living in, and they all have a key role in making it a very versatile and healthy living space for many different organisms. The last reason that I'm listing is that it is essential to native plants. So if we know anything about native plants and their importance to our ecosystem, we know that we want to take care of our native plants, and obviously taking care of our pollinators and making sure that our native plants have the pollinators that they need in order to pollinate those plants. Native plants and pollinators have a very symbiotic relationship. Some are host plants, some need specific pollinators, and it's a very complex system that's in place. So encouraging pollinators, bringing in more native plants, both of those go hand in hand for a healthy ecosystem. So how are we going to bring in pollinators? Here are a few different ways to bring in pollinators. Changing our perspectives on tidy yards. And I put that in quotations because I think we have this idea of like a golf green grass and perfectly manicured plants, very tidy, and those things aren't necessarily bad, but I think taking it in balance, realizing that the tall grasses that look a little bit wild are host plants and food for birds, and just realizing that the tidy yard idea is maybe going to be bringing in specific bugs and birds, and maybe restricting us a little bit when it comes to our native species. Again, native plants. It is important to be planting native plants in order to bring in pollinators. The pollinators that we have in our regions is very specific to the plants we have. Certain flowers can only be pollinated by a certain bee or a fly. The food produced in native plants is very specific to some of the bugs or creatures that we have living in our areas. So just being aware of what is native in our areas and maybe planting a few more of those just to make sure we can be accommodating to our pollinators. It was brought up in this session mention the risk that comes along with our artificial lighting outdoors. So whether it's a street light or a house light or garden lights, decorative ones, these lights can attract birds and moths and other insects that are very important, and it can have an effect on their lifespans actually. So making sure that our lights are actually the warm toned light instead of that cool spectrum lighting, because they are actually attracted to the cooler lights and they can't see the warmer light. So just switching out our lights and just being mindful, maybe setting timers, maybe only using motion lights, that would be a great idea just to protect our pollinators. Like every living thing, we need water. Providing a water source, whether that's a bird bath, a shallow one for butterflies, different types of water sources throughout your yard. And just making sure that they're clean and regularly maintained as well. So as we go through our Master Gardener training, we are learning more about insects and their different life cycles and patterns, and just being aware that different insects obviously need different habitats, but the different stages of their lives actually need different food sources. So just educating ourselves in that and providing as much as we can in variety so we can be accommodating for as many of our pollinators as possible. Just for an example, we know that there are different types of bees, right? Mason, mud, carpentry, and all of these different bees need different habitats. Maybe leaving a log so that the pollinator can find a habitat in that log, informing ourselves on these different habitats that are needed in our yards. So within the category of pollinators, we've discussed bees and wasps and flies. And all of these little creatures actually have different beneficial reasons that we would want to welcome them in our yards. But identifying what they are is key to realizing if we want them in our yards or not, because there are bees, wasps, and flies that are invasive or maybe not beneficial, but there are also some that we want in our yards, and we want to be able to recognize if we want them in our yards. So to recognize if it's a bee, the first idea would be to say if it's cute. Usually we can see a bee and decide if it's cute or not based on the fuzziness or the size of its body, a little bit more chubby. That's usually a good indicator if it's a bee. Does it want your steak? That is usually an indicator that it is a wasp, as they are carnivores. Do they have bulging eyes? Flies, all of these insects have large eyes, but the flies have the largest eyes of all. How many wings do they have? Do they have 2 wings or 4? That also helps you to determine. Are they shiny or are they hairy? Bees are very hairy, we know. Shiny would be a wasp. Antenna, what type of antennas do they have? All of these different factors of that insect that you're looking at and observing will help you to identify what it is. Another interesting fact is that approximately 74% of today's medicines are derived from plants. So that gives us a good indicator of why plants are so important and why we should be making our yards, the things that we can control, as diverse and as healthy as possible, because plants play a huge role in our health. So what attracts a pollinator? Now that you're sold on pollinators and you want them in your yard, here are ways to attract them. So they are attracted to flowers based on a different variety of characteristics, including the color and the scent of your plant, the amount of nectar and pollen they have, and the shape of the flower itself. So if you think of what a specific pollinator wants, it's usually determined by what that insect looks like. If you think of a hummingbird, right, their long beak tells you that they really like tubular flowers, right? All the different characteristics in a plant are very specific to that pollinator. So if you want to attract bees to your yard, here are a few flowers to plant. Monarda, thyme, echinacea, and snapdragons. Those are all flowers that are a great idea for bees. If you want to attract hummingbirds into your yard, vermilion, which is a nice tubular shaped flower, foxglove, columbine, delphinium, and salvia. If you want to attract those beautiful butterflies, you could plant zinnia, milkweed, and butterfly bush. Some more tips in order to make sure that your yard is a good site and habitat for these pollinators would to be avoid chemicals. Obviously, anything that you're killing is not going to be conducive to creating a nice ecosystem or habitat for these pollinators. Choose less hybrids. So some of these plants that we are getting that are maybe a cultivated variety or a hybrid can make it a little bit confusing or a little bit more difficult for our pollinators, right? They want a specific plant. And if there's a plant that gives them pollen a little bit easier than they would, but might not have the same nutritional benefits, they might go to that plant rather than the one that they actually need. So it's a very specific and complex system, and just realizing that and taking it with balance, right? Maybe plant a few hybrids and cultivars, but a lot of native species, it's always a good idea. And keeping dandelions and clover. And this comes back to that that tidy lawn idea. If we're ridding our yard of all of these early bloomers, those bees are going to take a hit, right? When they're coming out of dormancy and they need food fast, dandelions and clover is actually a great early food source for those pollinators. So like I said, these are huge topics, and just within the category of a bee, there are so many different families. So we've got bumblebees, we've got honeybees, leafcutter bees, mason bees, mining bees, carpenter bees, plasterer bees, wood carver bees. So there are over 20,000 different species in the world. And I'm not bringing this up to overwhelm you. It's rather just to get this sort of interest in your mind to realize not all bees are the same. They all have different specific reasons. They all prefer different plants, and kind of getting to know maybe some of the more common species in our yards and in our areas will kind of empower us to realize what they want and what they need and how to attract them. And of course, let's talk about what are pollinators. So butterflies, bees, moths, wasps even, beetles, flies, hummingbirds, and even bats. This is not a complete list. Of course, different birds are also pollinators. And it is a huge category. So I think next time I go out in the yard and I'm looking at all the different flies and wasps and moths, and I think I'll tell myself, like, a lot of these are actually beneficial. We have the tendency to, swat those flies and get rid of some of those wasps and traps. But I think understanding that we are in a very complex ecosystems ourselves, and realizing that all of these different bugs and mammals and birds have a part to play in the health of our own health and ecosystem, and just sort of partnering with nature and what's been designed around us, I think is a great plan of action. Well, that is what I have for you for pollinators. Like I said, it's a huge topic. I really encourage you to look at some of your local resources, maybe check out your local garden center for information. But I think just in a nutshell, bringing in those pollinators is a wise choice for us gardeners. Not only will it end up in a healthier world globally, but even individually, our yards will definitely be thanking us for bringing in those pollinators, and recognizing that most of the flies and beetles and bugs that we see are beneficial, and we want to partner with them in order to make our landscapes healthier, and just enjoying the process as well. Maybe taking time to observe them, getting to know a few of the more common bugs that are around us and bees. I think it's a great idea. Well, thank you for joining me. I hope you enjoyed this. I think our next session will be on vegetable gardens. Thanks again, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.